Hello, my name is Leo, and welcome to a new tutorial by Blauw Films. If you hear a cat meowing, that's Grigio. He's chilling. If you hear any wind outside, that's because the window is open so that Grigio can be meowing. Either way, hope that doesn't bother you. Welcome to compositing this space background scene. For those of you who know me, you might know Michael Wood. And for those of you who don't know me, Michael is a friend of mine who's working on a horror film set in Wales. And I'm sure he'll come on to Blauw Films to talk about it because we're basically producing that film as well together with Bogdana, another friend of mine who is producing it on her end. And Michael is a big Star Wars fan, and me and him have been talking about doing a thing together with Eric, who you guys might know from the Blauw Films team, on creating a Star Wars sequence a bit more akin to the original inspirations of Kurosawa cinematography and framing, and well, Michael will definitely tell you more about that later. Now, just some compositing. So we have this sequence over here as an example, and the planets you see in the back. First of all, if you need any tips on building your own planets, there are a bunch of tutorials on the YouTube channel for basically every planet of our solar system. And if you look at those, you consume all of them, you have a pretty good base, in my opinion, for the different types of planets there are, from gaseous planets to planets with rings to more complex life planets like Earth. And then I'm sure you would be able to go into Photoshop and paint out your very epic landscape maps for the entire planet. But first of all, let's turn these off and have a look at our sun settings. In this example, I'm using a Corona sun as my light source because it's easy to control due to simple rotation and angle options. And then I'm only using the color temperature over here to really decide on the mood that I'm looking for. And then afterwards, I'm increasing the size up to about 30 to make sure that I have a more Star Wars fall off on the planets. Usually planets in Star Wars, due to there always being an insane amount of stars, tend to look a bit more on the boosted side. I guess you could say that it has a bit of bounce light on it, as opposed to what you would see in NASA photography, where it's just a harsh line into the shadows. I'm using an intensity of 20, but that's mainly because I want there to be a nice reflection on the Naboo Royal Starship, which is a fully chrome ship, and I want there to be nice interaction with the light and some bounce light onto the Star Destroyer that's flying right underneath. The planets, I try to scatter them into a nice compositional flow with what's going in the foreground, basically trying to keep our focus to the planet, which is lower than these top ones over here, meaning that I'm using a bigger planet down here to kind of keep you looking low, if that makes sense. And then these two are to give a sense of depth. The light, if we go back to that, color temperature of 8500 is making sure that the planet Earth that I used as a base, which now has more snow and more clouds, is looking extra blue because we are on a pretty cold color temperature. If I were to change this to 3500, you can see you're suddenly in a very different galaxy. It's very important to make a well-judged decision on what the color temperature is you will be using. So that will basically give you a look similar to this, where there's a bit more of a fill on the right side of the planet, and the planet itself is pretty nicely lit. Let's have a look at what else I did to this. So first of all, let's turn everything off except for the base layer of planets. This is the EXR file almost straight out of the render. Here's still the untextured version of the Star Destroyer. I have cut out everything on the left in a mask and left this, and then I have pre-composed that together so I could start my compositing with this fresh layer. I have then duplicated that layer and added a few different glow effects. So first of all, this one I have set to an opacity of 15% with a Gaussian blur, a curves adjustment, and a hue and saturation effect that increases the saturation, kinda emphasizing that the glow is the same color of the atmosphere, which is why the planet looks so blue. Then we have the curves adjustments simply increasing the light because we are lowering the opacity so much we need a bit more punch, and then the Gaussian blur is what's creating the radius of the glow. A layer underneath is a duplicate of the original as well, with an opacity of 20% and a camera lens blur effect. The blur radius is set to 10 with an aspect ratio of 0.5, which matches our Corona renderer camera settings. Be sure to match yours to whatever you're using as well. This one is basically creating some kind of halo effect onto the planet, which is emphasized even more in this other duplicate that we have underneath. Finally, we have another layer that is only using a high Gaussian blur effect, and I have masked out the right side of each of these planets. I only did this right now because it's a still, but if I were to do this with the final moving shot, I will do a tutorial on that one as well when it's completed. There, I would either use a luminance value of just a black and white map of the shot and use that as a luma mask to control where the glow would show up. And then finally in the back we have our stars. Before we add our stars, let's say that if we have a shot of space where the planet would be this well exposed, you probably wouldn't see too many stars in your photograph. Depending on your camera settings, of course, and depending on how many filters you got in front of your lens, obviously your look would differ. This is probably what it would look like. Just the planet and its moons. But of course this is Star Wars, so we need a lot of stars, and you can't really have enough of them. We started off with 13 layers of stars, and each of these layers is a completely different positioning of the star assets. So here's the thing about stars. It's very difficult to find high resolution images that have color variation in your stars. These 100 Starfield assets have been extracted from 23,350 real NASA stars. We run an algorithm through them to make sure that we could repopulate them in any way we wanted, and they are 32 bits EXR files with a lot of range in the light spectrum. I'm setting them to 50% and I'm going to slightly randomize their positions, making sure that they don't all stay at the same place. No real reason for why I'm doing it this way, it's just that sometimes brute forcing it is faster than adding nulls or moving things around. The size of the stars to me feels fine compared to the planets. What I would like to add though is a lot more stars, but it's okay because these would be a nice backplate of our stars, and then we would have a plate of stars that is brighter and stronger. I'm gonna go into the Organic Starfields Pack and I am importing about 25 more. I'm adding them in the back, set them to add, and I'm lowering their scale. Alright, I feel like this is looking pretty good. I'm now going to randomly select some of these that I'm going to duplicate as well to make sure that those are bigger stars or bigger clusters or something important. This is slowly looking like Star Wars. I'm going to add a new adjustment layer in between these stars and the foreground, and now we can make a few more important decisions. So we are going to decide on how blurry this backplate is. We don't want the layer to be out of focus because our planets are in focus, so that wouldn't make sense. Now, we do want to add some kind of blur because our stars are never going to be perfectly in focus due to the absurd amount of how far away they are. We do want to make sure that it feels still as if they are in focus. Yeah, that's about it. Cool. Now I'm going to duplicate this layer, turn that off, and I'm gonna add a directional blur of, let's say, 11%. There you go. Set that to add. Lower the opacity to about 15%. Duplicate this layer and rotate it 90 degrees. Just giving each of these stars a little bit of a twinkle on them, a little bit of a star bokeh on them. Finally, I'm adding one more adjustment layer, and this is going to be our overall color correction. So I'm going to lower the gamma correction a bit We're going to be cutting some of these stars, but we are going to be making sure that the entire composition looks more interesting. I feel like that's about right. So there you go. That's basically a pretty Star Wars-like soft lighting and a lot of stars going on there. I would love to see what it would look like with the alternate lighting. And obviously, once I get the model textured, that's gonna be very epic as well. Like, it's gonna be crazy once the whole scene comes together, once the idea really comes together. Like, whether it's gonna be a war scene or whether it's gonna be a scouting scene or what's going on really. I have no idea. But we'll keep you updated. There's no title yet. There's no story yet. There's just an idea. So, I'm quickly gonna finish compositing this and then we'll get a render and then we'll call it a day. Thank you. If I were to take Ron as an example, just because I just happen to have seen it recently, so I guess it's on my mind. There is a very interesting color palette that they use, both in the set design and the actual choice of film that they used and whatever the processing ended up being. There's a great documentary that Eric once recommended me called AK, and it's made by Chris Marker, and it's really cool. It's basically a few days of the production of Akira Kurosawa's Ran. I would say if you're a filmmaker or if you're interested in some kind of film related stuff, definitely check that one out. I'm trying to see if we can replicate a similar kind of film process. Now we're gonna choose a black somewhere there, and we're gonna try choosing a mid-tone, which I guess this would be the closest. That looks about right. Now if I blend it 100% with the original, you'll see what we had. And if I start introducing it, you'll see we'll start dominating the colors. Now, the way we can go about this to make this work in tritone is you take this and then you either go slightly diagonally there or slightly diagonally up, depending on what the value is that you're going for. Right, in this case, I would assume in the midtones we have to go down a bit. And then for this, I am gonna go down a bit as well. And then there you go. That's actually pretty close to what the processing would be. I love how we're using a shot of Ran, which looks compositionally fantastic and incredibly well color coded. And then we're applying just a film process to our shot. Either way, whatever, right? Cool. Then we're gonna add a new adjustment layer with a elliptical mask. I'm gonna select the edges and move them up and down only on the left and right side. Subtract. Set it to 100. Cool. Now that's a bit strong, so we're gonna turn that down to about 3. I'm also gonna add a exposure effect to that same layer, quickly bringing down some of these values. I guess it's time for a little bit of grain. Now, the way I want to do this when it comes to grain is, you take the grain package you have. I'm going to be using the action one for this specific example, just because it's a bit stronger initially, so it's a bit easier to control. So I'm going to set that to soft light and bring the scale down. There we go. Now this looks intense and, epic but intense. But that's not really what I want either way. I want to copy the entire system you have below, set that inside of a pre-comp and then duplicate it. I'm gonna add a color correction tint effect, and I'm gonna add a color correction exposure effect. I'm gonna lower the gamma over here and increase the whites so that we have some nice bright spots. And then I'm gonna bring the cine action below it and set the mode to Luma. And basically what that's doing, we can now duplicate both of these things. And as you can see, it's only applying the grain to the bright areas of the film. And wherever it's dark, we are keeping nice darks. So that's it. I'm gonna do a render of this, and I'm also gonna be doing a render of the alternate lighting setup. Both of them I'll show you at the end of the video. I hope they turned out well. If not, let me know in the comments below. I'm excited to keep you updated on this project. Whenever Michael has time, he'll get on a video and we'll talk about it more. And whenever Eric is there as well, we can like really start making some of these shots happen. Except for that, Grigio did not say a single meow. So, well, maybe next time. Cheers, bye bye, have a good night.